great dinner. And can I just say for everyone right now, how amazing was Valerie Taylor? Thank you, Valerie. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you one of Australia's most accomplished adventurers and probably the most least known adventurer. And he will be presenting Adventurers Behaving Badly, the untold stories from the edge of the world. Michael McDowell is one of Australia's great adventurers. He is a leading innovator of pioneering the use of Russian icebreakers to take expeditioners to the frozen reaches of the Arctic and Antarctic North Pole since 1991. He also founded the Adventure Network International that continues to be the primary private aviation logistics support community in the interior Antarctic continent. He has organised significant natural history and scuba diving expeditions in remote Papua New Guinea, Micronesia and Indonesia for many years. In late 1990s, he again pioneered the use of deep diving submersibles to take people to explore the ocean's depths, including Titanic, the Bismarck, the Marianas Trench. He has been organising remote location expeditions for 26 years and currently serves on the board of Space Adventures. And he's also a dear friend of mine. I'm very proud to welcome him here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mike McDowell.
And I've got to say to start that the Explorers Club here in Australia and also Australian Geographic would not be the same without Todd. He is the driving force behind both of those organisations, and we're a lot better off for it. So I've put together here a series of slides. My dear PA, Madeline here, has been under stress all afternoon because I just got back yesterday from 2.5 weeks of diving in eastern Indonesia, so we had to throw all of this together very quickly. I'll try to not use the word I too much through this presentation because most of the things that I've done have been we. It's involved a number of people. I haven't done anything sort of solely by myself, and I've had the great joy of having an adventurous life, and I look around the audience here and see a lot of people who have done a lot of extraordinary things. I call myself more a potpourri adventurer. I try to do as much as possible in as many different locales and styles as possible. Somebody said, when are you going to write a book? It's like, who wants to sit around and write a book when you can do another adventure? And just get out and do that. So we'll lurch into it. I've got too many slides, and I'll try and move them through fairly quickly. My introduction to adventure was a chance meeting with this little expedition ship called the Lindblad Explorer that started, and funnily enough, guess where I met Valerie Taylor? On the Lindblad Explorer. And the day I met her, for a number of months after that, until I got very friendly with she and Ron, which was back in 1977, she thought I was horrible. She thought this Australian came on and he drank and he yahooed and chased all the women and did horrible things. And but we became very dear friends with both Valerie and Ron. And I've got to say, it's a bit hard doing a presentation after Valerie. It's a hard act to follow. So I spent quite a few years on that vessel as the expedition leader. We went all over the world. Arctic, Antarctic, all the remote islands in the Pacific, Indian Ocean, etc. And these are the sort of things we saw. My preamble to this, however, I actually worked as a geophysicist for the Australian government, and I spent, 1971, I had the joy of spending 13 months on Macquarie Island as a geophysicist, seeing some of the wonders, and that really woke me up. I wasn't an adventurer before that. Just a normal Sydney boy trying to, sort of figure out where you could get a free beer and meet some cute-looking chick. And I went down to Macquarie Island, which is an extraordinary place in its own sense, and that sort of awoke this, gee, I got to get out and see the world, and I've spent the rest of my life trying to do that. Antarctica, as you see, obviously, those who haven't gone to Antarctica, get your gear, get over there, get on a ship, go down and see some of the great wonders of the world. Moving on, Matt. Early 90s, I decided that rather than work for somebody else, or late 80s actually, I'll set up my own company, and I started a company called Antarctic Expeditions, which specialized in Antarctic and the Arctic. And it was just about the time of perestroika in Russia, when all of these Russian assets, of which there were numerous ships, both scientific ships and, in this case, nuclear icebreakers, were all available. The Russians were broke. They were willing to charter anything. So I started going heavily into Russia in 1990 and started chartering all sorts of vessels, this being one of them. And this is at the North Pole. This is a nuclear icebreaker. Just slow down a little bit. Nuclear icebreaker. Go back, Matt. Nuclear icebreaker, 2 nuclear reactors on this thing, 75,000 horsepower, 25,000 tons, and literally breaks its ice all the way to the North Pole. This is 90 degrees north. We're actually anchored, well, not anchored, but stuck in the ice at 90 degrees north. They're throwing down the anchor for a bit of a giggle. And normally we would then start diving in the channel, put the dry suits on, dive under the ice, and people go, wow, it must be cold. It's no colder than most other places in Arctic and Antarctic, just because you're at the North Pole. Remember, water freezes at 0 degrees or thereabouts, so if there's water, then it's going to be the same wherever you are in a very remote place and a cold place. So this is, we used to put the ceremonial pole up there, everyone sort of turn around. And North Pole and South Pole are unique in the sense that you can be on everybody's time zone, right? Because all lines of longitude meet at the poles. So if you walk around in a circle like this, we joke about the South Pole, that you can, on New Year's Eve, you can have everybody's New Year's Eve parties. You just keep moving around, take a little circle, you're on everybody's lines of longitude. The ice here, sometimes 8, 10, 12, 14 feet thick, and this thing just rams its way through, breaks. It's quite interesting because the ship lurches and bangs and crashes, and you see pieces of ice the size of trucks going by. Only the Russians can do this. They've got a number of these icebreakers, and Putin is very strategically building more of these because nobody else has the ability to command the Arctic like the Russians can. Now, the Americans are way behind on this sort of stuff, and nobody's even close. A little later, this sort of jumps forward a number of years, we always wanted to go to the North Pole. Only 6 people in history have been to the North Pole. And people go, what are you talking about? There's people get skiing up there. Yeah, they ski up there, they land in aeroplanes, they go up in the ships, as we did on the nuclear icebreaker. But it's all floating sea ice. The North Pole is actually 14,000 feet below the sea ice. So we did a big expedition in 2007. We took a nuclear icebreaker, another Russian icebreaker, these 2 deep diving submersibles, which I've used in a number of other expeditions. These will go to 6,000 meters. They're built in Finland. They're 3-man mini subs. There's 2 of them on board. So we took them up and we had to find a hole in the ice because the ice is, there's dense ice pack there. We found this little hole. This was about 1 kilometer from the North Pole. We put the subs in, we went down in them, we went 14,400 feet down, spent a couple of hours down there, and then the trick is you've got to find the hole again. Now, the guys who run it, the Russian crew, are unbelievably expert. But it was still a challenge. I mean, we lost communication and we lost the transponder network. And these guys had to work really hard to get us back through the hole, but eventually we got back there. As a result, we got medals from Mr. Putin. So we went to the Kremlin, and yeah. Now, this dude is a very small dude, as you can see. When he was putting his medal on, he was reaching up. You felt like you could swat him. But the bodyguards around him made sure that you weren't going to swat him. And he was actually very personable. He came over after the event, or during the event, and they were playing Oompa music, and there were lots of generals around, and everyone was getting medals. And he came over and he spoke reasonable English, and it was just after he'd been to Australia. He came down here for the APEC conference up in Queensland. And he came over and said, hello, Mr. Putin, blah, blah, blah. You got a wonderful country, Mr. Putin, you got to say that. And he said, well, I've just been to Australia and it was really good too. And had a glass of champagne, clicked it, and then he moved on. Now, you could see in his eyes that if you crossed him, he'd kill you right there on the spot. But that was an interesting experience. Matt? This is the classic bow of the Titanic. And I've had the joy of being down on the Titanic 5 times. And it's 12,750 feet, 3,750 meters down. And we've taken over the years, about 110 people down there, people who have paid to go. And we're trying to do it again next year. And you spend about 11 hours on each, 11 or 12 hours on each dive. It's about 2.5 hours down, 2.5 hours back, then lots of time exploring the two parts of Titanic and the debris field. This is the anchor up on the front of Titanic. Matt? These are the propellers, and this is an interesting challenge because the back half, or the back third of Titanic, is about 800 meters from the forward 2/3. And the back third is really damaged. And what it was stand by. What it was the air trapped inside, gets pressurized, and eventually it sort of exploded. So the stern end is a real mess. So to get to these propellers, you've actually got to go down and under the hull. And one thing you don't want to do with submarines is get them caught underneath. They're very safe as long as you can just come to the surface. So this was always a great challenge of the pilot to get us in underneath the aft end of the vessel. Lots of stuff in the debris field, lots of sign of human existence, of course, boots and shoes and other stuff in the debris field itself. Go. And as I said, when we put this together this afternoon, we rushed, so a little bit of this will come out of sequence. The gentleman on the right, unfortunately, was a friend of many of us here. He was killed in a helicopter crash down south of Nowra there 4.5 years ago. But the main point of the photograph is the gentleman in the middle is a guy from Cuba called Pipin. And he, at one stage, held the world freediving record. Now, freediving, in his case, he rides a sled down, and he went down on one breath of air 580 feet and came back. So they ride a sled down, a weighted sled, then they've got to jump off at the bottom and get back up to the top. We did this down in Cabo San Lucas in Baja California. And he was doing it the year after his wife had died doing the same thing. She got almost to the surface and died that exact depth. Now, she couldn't get the world record because she died. You've got to actually get to the surface. So he went back and went down to exactly the same depth, as a credit to her, so to speak, and came back. And at that stage, he held the world record. I think it's recently been broken. One of my great follies in life, and I've had many follies, and this gets back to what Todd was talking about there, that you get into the adventure world or the exploration world, there are a lot of screw-ups along the way. You only ever see the successes and the videos and everyone prancing around saying, aren't we great? There's a lot of stuff goes on behind the scenes that's a complete screw-up. I actually rebuilt this ship. And it was going to be, at the beginning, a $2 million rebuild. $40 million later, I was still borrowing money to finish it off and ended up losing $9 million because the GFC came along and you couldn't get rid of boats at that stage. But this was designed to be a research vessel, and you can see the two submarines, which are acrylic, go down to 1,000 meters. And as a result, you have this unbelievable panorama under the water there. I actually co-owned these at one stage with James Cameron, the guy who did Titanic and Avatar and all of that sort of thing. So we own these together. Then I was able to be involved with several guys here who were in the same project with Jim Cameron when he went down to the Marianas Trench. How long ago, Glenn? 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? Oh, was it that long? 12. So Glenn and Dave Goldie, both here, they were both involved in the building of this one-man submarine. It was built over in Annandale in a little warehouse there. And then Cameron took it out and dived to the Marianas Trench, which is almost 11,000 meters down. He did a single dive on this. It had only been done once before in 1960. There was a US team in a thing called a bathyscope, Trieste, that went down with a Swiss, Mr. Picard, and then another gentleman who's a very good friend of ours, Don Walsh, who was a captain in the US Navy. Anyway, Jim pulled it off. Glenn, sitting in the audience there, was very much involved with the system to keep people alive, or keep Jim alive in the main cabin, and Dave Goldie was certainly involved in lots of different mechanical design and building of this thing. We went about 3 years ago out on the boat that I built, my Great Folly, and we had a contract with NHK Television in Japan to find the giant squid, and we ended up finding and filming the only ever recorded filming of a giant squid, and this was the giant squid. This was a 56-day operation, and we got this guy one time, and he came down and sucked on the bait for 18 minutes and saved the whole shebang. And again, a little bit on the topic that Todd talked about, you see the video, you see everything, and you think, wow, gee, that's easy. It just all went like clockwork. This thing was a mess. We had 4 typhoons came through. We had mechanical breakdowns. The film equipment went to the crap. But of course, one of the great sort of magic tricks of documentary movies, you see the documentary movie and you think, oh, it's also sequential. It's just all together there. It's little snippets here, little snippets there, all sort of joined together to try and make it interesting for the show. One of the other things I got involved with back in 1987, and we've been running this company now for 30 years, we decided that we wanted to go into the interior of Antarctica. So this is our base, which right now we've got 4 aeroplanes there and 60 people at this base. We started about 3 weeks ago. Just stand by, Matty. And it's in the Ellsworth Mountains. And the main reason for setting it up at the beginning was so people could climb the highest mountain in Antarctica, which is called Vinson Massif. It's about 16,200 feet high. So we started in 87 so that people could come in and do that, and it's then expanded to the point now where we take 500 people a year. They fly to the geographic South Pole. They go out onto the sea ice in the Weddell Sea and camp with the emperor penguins, and then people ski 50 days to South Pole. And we do science support and logistics support. We use a big old Russian aeroplane, not so old, but a big Russian aeroplane called an Ilyushin 76 that we fly out of the bottom of Chile. We prepare a 3,500 meter runway on a glacier and bring this big aircraft in and land it on the glacier. We do about 25, 26 flights a season, and then we have 3 or 4 ski aircraft, twin otters on skis, etc., to take people all around the interior of Antarctica. This is actually at the geographic South Pole. The Barber's Pole there, they call the ceremonial pole, which has the original Antarctic Treaty was signed by 13 nations, one of which was Australia. So there's the 13 flags of the original nations. There's been another 30 countries have signed up since, but they only have the original flags there. Right next door to there, you can see buildings, is a very large American scientific base where they do a lot of astronomy, a lot of glaciology, etc. It's a year-round base. And remembering at South Pole, the people who are there, they get 6 months of darkness. So 6 months they don't see the sun, more or less. We take people as well. I've done a lot of expeditions myself out onto the sea ice, collecting emperor penguins, funnily enough, for zoos. And we get out, we camp near. We've done a number of special trips out there. These birds are quite phenomenal. They breed during winter time. Every other penguin breeds in summer, goes about its business. These things go down and lay their eggs in April and are then hatching chicks in late August, so to speak. And then they fledge in December and then head off to sea. And people say, where do they go? They go out to sea. You've got millions of penguins just swimming around the rest of the year out in the ocean. But, the cutest thing, I love these ones in the foreground here with their arms. It's almost like a rugby scrum sort of thing. So. And the camp we set up out there, which is a temporary camp each time, you can see the plane in the background. The penguins are very curious. These are adults who are going out to sea to feed, to come back and feed the chicks. they get really curious and they sort of wander past and hang around and look in the tents and generally just sort of think, you know, what the hell are these idiots doing, sort of thing. So it's quite a beautiful sight. Right where you see the clouds there, the little peak in the middle, that's the highest mountain in Antarctica. That's Vinson Massif. It's a good technical climb to get up there, and it's remote and it can be very cold if you get the winds. So this is our base camp. Now again, you see the sweet, pretty photographs here. Behind this is a lot of hard work and a lot of grief and a lot of things that go wrong. You know, aeroplanes break down, we have trouble sometimes with personnel who start to freak out, and then of course the paying clients sometimes are a complete pain in the ass, you know, bitching and moaning and carrying on, so, but we get on with it anyway. You can see how beautiful it is, and if you look at the ice shelf in the background, that's called the Ronne Ice Shelf, and it's one of the giant ice shelves in Antarctica. So where we are now, we're on frozen sea ice. Where you see the vertical ice cliffs there, anything from there is an ice shelf, which again is a floating ice shelf. You know, ice shelves are actually the floating extension of inland glaciers. But we're out on sea ice, and later in the season, probably another month from then, the complete screw-up happens in that the ice breaks up. So we've got to get in, watch the ice, and get out before all that happens. We went, Greg Mortimer, some of you know Greg Mortimer. Greg Mortimer and I were the first Australians to climb Mount Vincent, I think it was 1989. And this is the slog up there, and you've got this absolutely exquisite view down the Ellsworth mountain chain. I mean, if you don't think, I don't believe in any heavens or hells or any of that sort of thing, but that's heaven. I mean, now it's only heaven as long as the weather's good. And that's one of the great challenges in Antarctica or any of the polar regions. You've got to deal with weather, and you can have some almighty screw-ups when the weather doesn't want to facilitate, including dangerous ones. So we use these aircraft. You can see the skis. So these are two Twin Otters. We bring these down from Calgary in Canada each year. They fly all the way down and then spend the whole season landing out in the absolute middle of nowhere in Antarctica itself. This is one of the great screw-ups that we had, Todd. You think you know Antarctica and you look at the surface and think, oh, this is all cool. And what you don't sort of always understand is exactly where the crevasses are. Now, we use a very sophisticated process now. Just hold it, Matty, as we go through. You can see here, everything over there looks hunky-dory. This did look hunky-dory until we put a vehicle through it. We put a big track vehicle down it. Just hold there, you can see the blade on the track vehicle. That was a 500,000 brand new tracked vehicle that our driver decided to get a little sort of pushy on. The only thing he did right, and he's a very, very skilled operator, was as this thing slid down the hole, he turned it so it went down backwards. Because otherwise he and the other guy in it would have went through the windscreen, and that crevasse goes a lot deeper. This only went that deep because it wedged. People would have gone a lot further down. Now that thing, here we had, as I said, this $500,000 investment, and we had a whole lot of programs dependent on it, and within days this dude stuck it down the crevasse. Now that stayed there for 1 year. You can see all of this planking and whatever. We sent in one of the amazing things with buildings and cranes and whatever are a group of people called riggers. And these guys can move anything from anywhere, extract anything out of any hole. So we sent a bunch of these guys in, and they pulled this thing back out a year later. This was a season later. And the only thing that was really damaged was the cab. And so we repaired that. The rest of it was okay, and it's down there and running around very happily right now. Skip one there, Matt. Back. Oh, it was a double up. Okay, sorry. How did you double up? I'm going to dock your pay. No, well, occasionally, yeah. When I can afford it, every now and again, I slip her a check, and I give her free wine and whatever. This was one photograph. In 1990, I chartered a ship, and we went into the Ross Sea, and we had 2 trips. And in between that, of course, was 3 weeks. By the time the ship got to the Ross Sea and went back, the next group came down. So I thought, well, this is a really cool chance to actually get into this remote part of Antarctica called the Dry Valleys, which is one of the great wonders of Antarctica, and also Mount Erebus. So here we're on the top of Mount Erebus, which is an active volcano, and it builds these big vents where the steam comes up and it all freezes, and it sort of creates these big towers that you can chip in the bottom of, get inside, and it's like being in a sauna. But this is up high. Sorry, the other one there was, so we had 3 weeks to ourselves with a helicopter. We took a helicopter down from Australia, and we just, floated around in this helicopter, myself and another guy. You can't do that anymore because the governments now are like, no, this is all protected territory. So the bureaucrats are in there heavily. This is up near the top of Vincent, looking down the glacial system and the mountains in the background. As I say, absolutely spectacular. On top of Vincent, Australian Geographic, yeah, and then Greg Mortimer on the right, myself on the left, on the top of the mountain. So, as I said, I like to try and do as much as possible in as many locales as possible. So I've done a lot of dog sledding, and this is dog sledding across Greenland. So we started on the eastern side of Greenland, and this is literally, this wasn't just set up for a photograph. On this nice flat area, the dogs just run, you tie yourself onto the sled, and you can actually read a book. So we went across, just hold on that, Matty. What's happening in Greenland is the Greenland ice cap is significantly melting. And I've been going back to Greenland for many years, including this year and the year before, etc. And these are the melt streams that rush down from this melting glacier now to the coast. And if you fall into one of these, you're dead because there's no way to get out. It's completely smoothed ice. You wouldn't be able to get any sort of purchase on it. So the dogs couldn't get across this, so we had to spend a lot of time sort of roped up, as you can see, and tied in and moving the dogs from one side to the other. Now, on this particular trip, our screw up, the only way to have a bath was to get out and have a snow bath. And the dogs found that sort of mildly amusing, just watching. There was nothing to see from a sexual object point of view because it was all withdrawn and frozen, and so there was nothing about to happen there. We set up a company in the late 90s to take people to space, and we've taken 8 people to the space station who have paid anything from 20 million. The last lady was up for 48 million US dollars to have a 10-day flight. We buy the 3rd seat on the Soyuz from the Russians. These people, sorry, this is not them, but you'll see a photo in a minute. They actually have to go to Moscow and train for 6 months, along with the American and the Russian astronauts to go. At the same time, we set up another company and bought an aeroplane to run zero-gravity flights. So we ran these. You can be weightless for about 25 seconds at the top of the parabola. And as a result, you can fly like Superman. You will walk around the inside of the aircraft upside down. You can do all sorts of tricks. And it's the weirdest feeling when you first go weightless. I mean, the brain just goes, no, this is not right. And they used to call these, when the NASA used them, they used to call them the vomit comet, because most people got quite motion sick. But we found the trick with that with lots of tablets. So this is, the Russians launch all of their stuff to space, or most of their stuff from space, from the steppes in Kazakhstan. So we went out and watched one of these launches. And I had my son Timothy, who was very young at the time, with me. At 2 o'clock in the morning, and this is the difference between the Russians, in those days, the Russians and the Americans, at 2 o'clock in the morning, we went out and went up the side of the rocket in the lift, up to the top of the rocket, one stage less than where the human capsule was. We were on that deck for an hour, touching the rocket, playing, talking. Then went down, stood under the rocket until a guy came up and went, "You've got to go, we're about to refuel with liquid oxygen, so you need to get out of here." Now you can imagine the Americans at Cape Canaveral or Cape Kennedy doing that. So this thing blasted off on on schedule, and one of our clients who was paying an enormous amounts of money, she was the first woman to do it. She went up and spent 10 days on the space station orbiting and then came back down. The guy on the left was one of my partners. You can see the names on the other dudes, very Russian, professional Russian astronauts. Guy on the left is an American called Richard Garriott. His dad was an astronaut with NASA, so that was the first father and son astronaut situation. He paid $22 million. He paid $22 million to go up there. He got a discount because he was our partner, so he made all of his money out of games. Just a couple of photos here. The guy in the middle is the sub-pilot. Obviously, I'm the ugly dude on the right there. Gentleman on the left, Don Walsh, first man to go down to the Marianas Trench in 1960, and a very valued member of the Explorers Club on all sorts of committees of the Explorers Club in New York. Guy in the middle, Anatoly Sagalevich, head of the whole Russian submarine operation, the most experienced scientific submariner in the world. And the man on the right, anybody recognize him? Fred McLaren, president of the Explorers Club for many years. And so he came out and dived with us down the Titanic. This was, I can't imagine. He needs teeth work done, whoever he is. We did a big expedition by helicopter a couple of years ago up in the northern Greenland, north and northwest Greenland, and it is the most spectacular place, rarely visited. Everything sort of gouged out by glaciers. You can see the ice in the background. That's the Greenland ice cap. But we were landing with the helicopters here out in areas probably nobody's ever sort of set foot on, and just these spectacular views of like mini Grand Canyons just everywhere you looked. Go, Matt. One of the other things that I'm involved with, we have a company, we're recovering Spanish galleons. So these come off a 1631 galleon down in Panama. We got 10,000 coins and various other stuff off there. Go to the next one, Matt. This sort of stuff. So gold jewelry. You can see a stamp there. All of these coins are hand minted in Potosí in Bolivia, which was the world's biggest silver mine. So these are all handmade. So we got lots of gold jewelry and whatever, and we're currently working extensively off the coast of Florida on a number of other Spanish galleon wrecks. This year in January, we were down in Antarctica on my vessel that I fortunately sold to some other sucker and let him, he's worth $17 billion, so he doesn't have quite the problem I had with it. And we were using the submarines here under giant icebergs, so you can just see in the background the icebergs. So we were diving the subs down under the icebergs, and the scenery is absolutely spectacular because all of the water erosion's happening, so you get all these strange shapes in the iceberg. And the reason icebergs turn over is their center of gravity changes as they melt from underneath. Eventually the center of gravity is too high, so guess what happens? They flip over. And hence the really beautifully formed icebergs that you see when you travel to Antarctica, you're looking at what was originally the bottom of the iceberg. It's now turned over and it's got all those beautiful formations. David Attenborough. So again, this is on my Folly boat. What was it, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? He did the Barrier Reef, when was it? 15, okay, 2015. So David was on with us, and he's the most charming individual you would ever meet, and just the greatest sense of humour. And of course, he absolutely mesmerises people when he sits at dinner and talks about, well, back in 1956 when I first started, and he tells these unbelievable stories. And his, connection with nature has probably exceeded that of any other person ever. He's just a wonderful guy. And my secretary here, just to think he's the most beautiful, wonderful individual. She's asking him if she could marry him several times. And we found this strange species out somewhere. I can't imagine where it was. Valerie was trying to hide. She's trying to be a bit of reef. So she put this on and looked like one of the harlequin tusk fishes or whatever. Anyone know the guy on the left? David Beckham, yeah. We took David Beckham down to Antarctic to play a soccer match. He did 7 games on 7 continents for the UN. He was a UN ambassador, so we took him down there and he played an official 7-a-side game, and we marked out a pitch using Kool-Aid orange in the snow to mark it out. And you know, this guy, for all of his fame and whatever, he's just like one of the boys. He was really a lovely guy, just really, you know, unsophisticated, loves to have a drink in the pub and whatever. So just finishing off, you know, in my case, I've been very lucky and fortunate to have a long life of adventure, and I don't intend stopping. So this year we were up dog sledding in far northwestern Greenland with my son and a friend, and you know, we had the polar bear kit and whatever. And the interesting thing here is for those of you who know your Arctic history, the gentleman on the left, who is very much an Inuit Eskimo, he's the grandson of Robert Peary. Great-grandson, sorry, of Robert Peary. Peary had a number of dalliances with the local Eskimo ladies, and so he was a product of that. So the gentleman, what was his name, Timothy? Namanuchok, and he was the most lovely guy to be with. Didn't speak a word of English. That was all gesticulations and laughter and slaps on the back and whatever. So we went out for 12 days from a very remote place called Karnak up in the northwest, and dog sledded around, and we had 12 beautiful days of weather and whatever. So is that it? All right, now 5 minutes. What I'm going to bore you with now is I've got some footage that we shot. We worked closely with an organisation in Connecticut called Woods Hole. Not Connecticut, sorry, Massachusetts. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. We used their cameras on a lot of these expeditions. So a friend of mine who runs the photographic department there sent us about 6 minutes here, so we'll bore you with 6 minutes showing the subs down on Titanic, Bismarck, and these hydrothermal vents. Here we go. Maddie, we're not getting it. What's happening? I'm seeing it all, but you're not. What's happening, Matt? Get up here, Valerie. You ought to see her. Do any of you remember, some of you are old enough to remember the Bondi Stomp? Valerie is the greatest Bondi Stomp dancer you've ever seen. Unbelievable. Here we go. Thank God somebody knows how to do these things. I certainly don't. Yes. Well done. Claps for the lady here. Fabulous. Okay, so these are the Mirs, Mir 1, Mir 2 being launched from the side of their mothership, the Keldysh. So we're stuck inside there. 3 people inside, the pilot plus 2 observers. This is a nice, calm day. Sometimes we've got to retrieve in 10 and 12 foot seas, which gets really interesting. So this is down at 16,000 feet, almost 5,000 meters. 5,000 meters is Bismarck. This is Bismarck. You can see the gun emplacement on the right here. We could see the shell holes that took out the bridge, crippled Bismarck. Oh, thank you. Still there. We could see inside the hangar, we could still see the aeroplane there. They used to launch an aeroplane off the catapult. And there's still, the wooden decks are still in place. And these are the gun turrets. This vessel had 16-inch guns, so they used to sit in a geared round area here. The big guns are out in the thing. Good German leather boots. There's an area there we call the Field of Boots.
Which year was this?
This was, oh God, I can't remember. Okay, 203. We're now down on the hydrothermal vents, you know, these big active volcanic areas on the mid-Atlantic ridge and also out in the Pacific North Rise. And you can see the shrimp population. So this is pumping out hydrogen sulfide and black smoke. And you have all of these weird creatures living around the edge because they're living on bacteria and all sorts of stuff coming out from the center of the Earth. And the trick here is the shrimp has to make sure it doesn't get too close. Otherwise it'll be fried in an instant. We actually ate some of these and we reckon they were costing about $40,000 a kilo was the cost of the expedition and the sub dive to bring them up. But we put a lot of garlic on them because of the hydrogen sulfide. We salvaged this vessel. We were hoping it was a galleon, and we call it the coconut wreck for obvious reason. It turned out its cargo was coconuts, and it was a Jamaican trading vessel that sank in 1812. And this is at 16,300 feet down. Between Bermuda and Bahamas. And it had lots of wine bottles, so they obviously enjoyed the voyage until they sank. And we retrieved all of these objects, the plates, and there was guns and pistols and all sorts of stuff. And we also see the thing in the front. That's all coins, silver coins. So we retrieved all of those silver coins as well. We got about 1,500 silver coins. You betcha. It was out in international waters. It changes if you're in local waters. This is the Titanic. And this is the classic up front bow shot. The snow in the water is just particulate matter. So this is the front of the foredeck of Titanic. Some of the machinery up forward. This is the mast that's fallen, and the guy who saw the iceberg was actually at the top of this mast when he saw it. And he's the one, a little bit too late, unfortunately, who said, "Iceberg ahead." So this is along the top level cabins. And this is Captain Smith's cabin, and that's his bathtub. So the wall is rusted away, and this is right behind the bridge, so that's where Captain Smith. This is one of the controls in the bridge, and we used to, and you can see people have put plaques down here, a bunch of wackos have put plaques down there over time, and we used to land the sub on the deck there and have lunch on the bridge of the Titanic, which was always a bit of a giggle. Again, more boots, more signs that there were humans on board. And again, the propellers up the aft end. No, that's good. So along the way, as I said, it all looks like, oh, gee, it just goes off perfectly. Everything works wonderfully. There's a lot of financial risk and at times financial loss. There's a lot of hassles. You know, a lot of people say, oh, you've been so lucky, you've done so much. Gee, how can we do that? Very simple. If you want to adventure, go out and take an adventure. One of the things you've got to give up is that stability that most of us crave. And you've got to give up that thing called comfort. And that's one of the great delineators. If you want to go and see some of the most extraordinary places on Earth, just get away from your five-star cravings, your daily hot shower, etc., etc. Get out and do it. And at any age, and especially the younger people, I mean, you come to things like this and go, oh, that guy's done this and that girl's done that. You can also do it. It's all out there waiting if you're prepared to take a risk. And the only thing that I ever did that I think was smart, when I had an opportunity and a door opened, I walked through it. And a lot of people will look at the door and go, oh, I don't know what's on the other side, so, you know, I'll give it a miss. So I suggest, you know, even at any age, get out there and see what is an extraordinary planet, and there's still so much stuff that very few people see. So, end of story.
John, can we have the lights up, please, or someone? When you get a chance. Does anyone have any questions? Okay.
Yeah, remembering the magnetic pole's not at the North Pole, but it's it does dip. A friend of mine who's a very wealthy individual and hence can afford to pay for a lot of special expeditions. He's the only person in the world that's been to all 8 poles. And people go, oh, 8 poles, what are you talking about? So at each end of the Earth, there's a geographic pole, which we all go North Pole, South Pole. There's a thing called the magnetic pole, which is where the interior magnet inside the Earth, or the equivalent of, that's where the lines of force enter and whatever. Then there's what's called the geomagnetic pole, which is where you swing a dipole and that points, and that's different to the magnetic pole. And then there's one called the pole of inaccessibility. That's the big one that most people will never get to. And the pole of inaccessibility in the example of Antarctica is the point in Antarctica that's the most remote. So it's the farthest from the coast in all directions. Now, that changes because you have ice shelves breaking off at the moment, which changes the geography a little bit. So this guy's been to all 8. Now, he paid a lot of money to get to all 8. I've been to 5 or 6. I think I've been to 6. And I didn't pay squat because I always try to organise it so some other sucker paid for it and I could sort of go along with him. So when we did the pole of inaccessibility in Antarctica, we did a 2,000-kilometre tractor train. So we drove these tracked vehicles with sleds behind 2,000 kilometres, got to the pole of inaccessibility. We had to use an aeroplane in the end because our tractor broke down. This is a brand new tractor. And that was the longest vehicle service job ever done. We were under warranty, so we were out at the pole of inaccessibility, right, or very close to it, and we had to ring these dudes up who sold us this tractor in Canada. They had to fly a guy from Canada all the way through South America. Then we had to fly them into our base. Then we had to put him on a Twin Otter and fly him up. And what had gone bizarre or gone haywire was the injector system. And of course, it's not like these days with normal old-style diesels where the mechanic can go, hit it with a hammer and it'll fix it. It was all electronic. So this dude had to bring in a computer down. It took him 10 days to get there and 10 days to get back home, and they had to pay for it all. So that was the longest service. The interesting thing about the pole of inaccessibility that we went to the Russian calculated pole of inaccessibility, where they had been in 1958 for the International Geophysical Year. They had a base which is now underground, still sticking above ground, and has been there for almost 60 years. And when we did this, probably 55 years, was a bust of Lenin. And it's still there on a pedestal, this bust of Lenin staring out over this, the Antarctic ice cap. And that area is 14,000 feet above sea level. So you've got 14,000 feet of ice below you. It's higher than the South Pole. South Pole is about 9,200 feet. This is 14,000 feet. This guy who paid for all of this said, Mike, we got a problem. Oh yeah, okay, what's that? Here we go. So we've got a broken down vehicle. We're trying to fly people from Canada to fix the vehicle. We're trying to bring aircraft in. Everything's going haywire. And this guy, we don't want to, sort of have a claim against us that we have to refund the $1.5 million that this guy had paid. So he said, look, the Russians calculated in this 58. I've got a new calculation from the British that says the pole of inaccessibility is 100 kilometres away. Can we go there? I said, yeah. So we got a, yeah, that's about to fall off the stick. Grab that, Matt. So we ended up having to fly this guy and land out in the middle of nowhere at the British pole of inaccessibility because he wanted to make sure that nobody could ever do it. Now, he was with me also when we dived at the North Pole. He paid $1 million to have the second seat on the sub that went down to the North Pole. And he's coming back this year and he's paying another $1 million to bring 25 friends of his and whatever. So what can you do? He sells pharmaceuticals, so if any of you are on sort of heavy pharmaceutical doses, he's probably making money out of you.
Thank you, Mike. I know you guys have got many more questions, but the night's not over. We're going to be social now and turn the lights on and have a chat. So just please come up to Mike and Valerie and ask your questions. My big take home... by the way, first of all, I just want to like to thank you for that amazing presentation. Thank you. Personally, leading a couple of expeditions for Australian Geographic and having things fuck up, if I'm going to ever screw up in Antarctica, I'd certainly want to do it with you. That's definitely the way. But really, guys, I don't know how many of you knew about Mike McDowell before this evening, but how many of you actually knew there was an Australian out there doing all of this amazing things for decades, and he's just not on the public radar, not generally. He's one of Australia's most greatest expeditioners and adventurers, and he's just not known, and he really should be.
And don't tell the police or the tax department. One of the reasons I stay under the radar.
You definitely, you were one of the first, Valerie. So, Michael, thank you very much for your contribution to this. Thank you, everyone. Guys, I know a lot of you have been to these events over the years, and to you would all have known that it's been an extremely big year for the Australian and New Zealand chapter of the Explorers Club. We've had 5 events this year, most notably 2 in Melbourne, which were first, and we've had many new members join this year, and a lot of new members about to become approved from New York. If you're thinking about becoming a member, please see our amazing membership manager over there, David Strike, in the black. Wave your hand so everyone knows. This guy will get your membership through. Okay, we'll do everything we can to assist you. And I just wanted to say that we're all volunteers at the Explorers Club, and it's a big job to put these nights on, and it's just impossible to do it without the assistance of your volunteer committee. And I was just going to generally thank them tonight, but no, I actually changed my mind. I really want to say thank you, Steve Trawaris in Melbourne, John and Ann Lease, because without John and Ann, we will not be in this amazing location. David Strike, of course, our membership manager. Jane Jenkins, who is my right-hand man in doing everything actually physically here on the night. Woman. Sorry, woman. Okay, sorry. I knew I was going to screw up, but I thought I was going to do that by forgetting her name. Chris Bray, Damien Severo, Ronald Gibson, Lawrence Bate, Sophia Collingsworth, and a very new guy who you're going to hear a lot more about, Casimir Zerl. I really hope I haven't missed anyone, but that's what I'm remembering right now. These events are not possible without our members coming along to enjoy these evenings, but also the greater public who come along who want to hear our adventures and enjoy them. So I would also like to thank that tonight for the first time we're using the staff of the boathouse to basically cook our food and wait on us. So Harriet, thank you very much. Carlos in the kitchen, Jordana, thank you. You've made the night so much more smoothly running, and we haven't left you with the colossal mess in the morning, which we normally used to do. So guys, please finally join me in thanking Valerie Taylor and Mike McDowell. I wish you a happy Christmas, and thank you all for being part of the Australian New Zealand chapter of the Explorers Club. Thank you.
For any Americans in the audience, are there any Americans?
Yes.
Happy Thanksgiving. It's Thanksgiving today, actually, in the US. I'd like to thank especially Madeline McGrath, who has the very, very uncomfortable job of working for me and putting up with me and my tantrums and whatever. She spent the whole afternoon today telling me, why didn't you do this before? Why didn't you do this before? But she spent the whole day and put it all together. So thanks, Maddie.
And just finally, Grant Dwyer and Dana Trabar down the back there have volunteered their night to man the merchandise desk. They're not being paid. They've done this as friends. They've done an amazing job. They're going to go home very soon. But if you want to buy anything, Valerie Taylor's amazing books, one of our incredible T-shirts, please see them, because really they've got to go home. 10 minutes, shop closed. And guys, thank you very much. Stay around for a drink, and thank you.